again, obviously, if you're following me, you know that this story means a tremendous amount to me. And I think that it needs to mean a tremendous amount to everybody because it is a symbol of all of the sort of main trends of our world. Generic anti-corruption politics is the handmaiden of fascism. If you don't have a discussion of corruption politics that is structural, that deals with markets, that deals with sequestered wealth, that deals with oligarchy, that deals with capital, then it's going to be just a sort of moralistic tool that will play in the hands of demagogues, Trump, Bolsonaro, Modi, and so on. Also, Lula, again, as an individual, was an extraordinary leader. He helped lead Brazil out of a military dictatorship in the 80s. At this event on Saturday, one of the speakers was a director of global strategy, I believe, for, I think, the Food and Commercial Workers Union. And he first met Lula in 1981 when he was doing solidarity work while Lula was in prison by the Brazilian military junta. And he said, ever since then, he and Lula stayed in touch, and that anytime Lula visited the United States, including as president, he always met with labor unions right after he had met with his counterpart. So when he met George W. Bush in 2003, within the next hour, he was at AFL-CIO headquarters. And one conversation, Lula told him one of the main ag conglomerates in the United States is actually a Brazilian multinational. And he's like, Lula would tell me what's going on. I'll talk to them if you're giving your people problems. He was a trade unionist leader in a way that there were definitely been other heads of state that were trade unionists, but not necessarily all of them demonstrated the same level of continuity of commitment, the same achievement of bringing 30 million to 40 million people out of poverty, massively expanding healthcare and education, labor protections, and resetting Brazilian foreign policy. This is a tremendously important leader in a strategically vital country. This is one of the biggest countries in the world and the biggest country in Latin America. And if you don't think that the governance of Brazil affects you or any place that you might be interested in, you're frankly not assessing it properly. So there were mass demonstrations. Again, he's in jail with absolutely no material evidence. They have put into solitary confinement, only allow him to meet with his lawyers now for 30 minutes at a time, have blocked his communications, kept him out of the presidential race, which he comfortably led over Bolsonaro without a shred of material evidence. I would be the first one to tell you that if they found Lula on some petty corruption charge, I would still say what he has accomplished for people far outweighs it. I'm honestly shocked that in an effort that has cost this amount of money and had this many resources put into it with the backing of the DOJ, that they have not found anything is actually mind-blowing. It's shocking. And if you talk to people around the Workers' Party, they'll say, no, Lula actually was quite careful because he knew that he couldn't make a single mistake if he was going to be the first bottom to the top president of Brazil. This is a report from Michael Fox in the World News Network, and then I'll read briefly. Lula published an op-ed in Brazil's largest daily, the first op-ed they've let him publish in a year. But these are from some of the protests in Curitiba on Sunday.
Brazilian Congresswoman Benedita da Silva read a letter from former President Dilma Rousseff.
Even in prison, you are the greatest enemy of the neo-fascism that is threatening us. Over these 365 days of unjust imprisonment, you have shown the Brazilian people that it is possible to resist even in the worst conditions.
Lula was arrested last year after he was convicted of accepting a beachside apartment from a company seeking government contracts. But his conviction was based on plea bargain testimony and scant evidence. He and his supporters have always maintained his innocence.
Lula left office in 2009. Then suddenly, in 2017, after his name was floated as a potential presidential candidate, supposed evidence began to surface, although none of it was concrete. So you start to think, all right, something is not right here.
It's a smart kid. Brian Mayer at the Brazil Wire, which I always shout out, and you need to read that site, has translated this piece from Folha de Sao Paulo, and the title is "Why Is There So Much Fear of a Free Lula?" And Lula writes, among other things, Today, it's clear that my conviction was part of a political movement which started after the re-election of President Dilma Rousseff in 2014. Beaten at the ballot box for the fourth consecutive time, the opposition chose the road to coup to return to power, restarting the authoritarian addiction of the dominant Brazilian classes. The coup of impeachment without a crime of responsibility was enacted against the model of development with social inclusion which the country had been building since 2003. In 12 years, we created 20 million new jobs, lifted 30 million people out of extreme poverty, increased the GDP fivefold. We opened universities of millions excluded and overcame hunger. This model is unacceptable to the privileged and prejudiced layers of society. There were powerful economic interests from outside Brazil. While the pre-salt petroleum reserves drew the greed of foreign petroleum corporations, Brazilian companies began to compete for markets with traditional exporters from other countries. Mark Blythe talked about this several years ago and how the workers' government actually leveraged mid-sized Brazilian corporations to become multinationals and then funneled the money back into social programs at home. Lula concludes, why is there so much fear of a free Lula? If they achieved the goal of blocking my election, is there nothing to sustain this imprisonment? The truth is that what they are afraid of is the organization of the people who identify with our national project. They're afraid that they will have to recognize arbitrary actions that they committed to an elected, incapable president who fills us with shame. They know that my freedom is an important part of the return of democracy to Brazil, but they are incapable of coexisting with a democratic process. That's 100% true. We need to stay on this. I would ask any single Democratic presidential candidate that you have an opportunity to ask a question, what are you going to do about this? Both as a political prisoner and also broadly, the reassertion of a U.S. Permanent coup and interference stance in Latin America, which... Again, the coup against Manuel Zelaya in Honduras in 2009, which was backed by Hillary Clinton at the State Department, is incredibly important for understanding this reversal. It starts under Obama and accelerates under Trump. Bush tried, but apparently it's just... part of the kind of sick ironies of history was that they were so consumed with waging global war in the Middle East and South Asia that they had less time to interfere in Latin America.